Recording to start. Okay. So what I said I was going to do yesterday was I was going to get my tablet working, which it's working, so we're good. That's wonderful. But what I said I was going to go over was take some of these examples that I showed the slides for and try to kind of visually help you understand how this works. So let me go ahead and pull that up if I can. Okay. What? Oh, come on. Oh, there it is. See if this lets me join. Okay. All right, so let's see here. So what I want to do is I want to share my screen. And this should work, hopefully. Okay. Let me just start it. Let me just open up a new one here. Okay, so the idea was one of the things that we talked about yesterday was we were talking about how to resolve these relationships. And so let me go over the simple one first. So we said the one-to-many. So an example of a one-to-many relationship might be trying to think of an example here of a simple, very simple example. Let's say we have a bank, okay, and let's say we have a bank where you have a customer, okay, and you have an account, okay. So you have an account entity, you have a customer entity, and let's say that an account must have a customer, but only one. Account can only belong to one customer. By the way, that is actually something that's quite different that we had to get used to here in Turkey. See, in America, my bank account that I had when I lived in America had both my name on it and my wife's name on it. We had what was called a joint account, so that she had a card, I had a card. We could both use the account. We both had our contact information was associated with the account. And so we could both use it. Like basically my money is her money and her money is, her money is her money. Anyway, joking, right? But our money was together as one. The thing is, when we moved to Turkey, I got a bank account and it had my name on it. And when I went in there one time, when I went into the bank one time, I asked the teller, the person working at the bank, so can I get a card for my wife to be able to use the account? And they said, oh, you need a card. And I said, yes. They said, oh, did you lose the other one? I said, no, I just need a second one. And he said, oh, well, why do you need a second card? And I said, well, so that my wife can access the account. And he said, why? So I thought that was kind of funny. But so if this were an American bank, we might have, this could be maybe one or two customers, right? But let's just, for the sake of simplicity on this one, we're going to say an account must belong to only one customer, okay? Now a customer, if we have them in our system, it makes sense. Exactly. So it makes sense that if we have a customer in the system, they must probably have at least one account, and we'll say that they can have more than one, right? They can have many accounts. All right. So a very simple example, customer information, account information. So let's take a look at what the tables might look like. Okay. So we have a customer table. They'll have things like a name, maybe a phone number, right? And just lots of, other information, right? So this would be what their table would look like. And then the account would also have its own columns as well. It might have an account number. It might have a type. Is it a savings account? Is it something else? Is it an investment account? Stuff like that. It would have maybe a balance, right? How much money is in the account, right? And there would be some other things as well. Okay, but these are just some example attributes we might keep in there. Okay, so we've got to somehow figure out a way. Come on. Oh, there we go. We've got to figure out some way. How do we link these items together? How do we say a customer belongs to an account or an account belongs to a customer? We've got to figure out some way to do that. Well, fortunately for us, in the many-to-many relationship, this is actually quite simple. And basically what we do is we add a column here or columns. I shouldn't say one column because sometimes it may be more than one. But we add a column that is the customer ID. So maybe the customer might have, instead of a name and phone number, maybe they might have a primary key would be their ID, or their in the case of, like, in a Turkish system, you might put their TC kimlik number, right? That would be a unique identifier. Well, what we do is we take that customer and we put them, and in that way we know. Let's see here. I'll put their ID here. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So if we put 1, 4, 1, 2, like this, then what we now know is that this account here belongs to customer 1, whoever customer 1 is. This account also belongs to customer 1. And that way, the customer can have many accounts. Also, this way, the account can belong to only one customer. Okay? This is the simplest way to do this, because if we were to say, let me see here. I would like to change color. Okay. If we were to try to say add a column here for accounts, then every time that a customer gets a second account, we have to duplicate the row, right? So if customer 1 were to have a second account, we would have to have a new row with the same information. But this violates what we're trying to do in terms of data redundancy. We're trying to limit the amount of data duplication. So we don't want to do things this way. So what we would do is we would have the customer column here that points to that way. Each account, we say this is the customer that owns that account. Okay. Some other points that I would like to make out for this is if this is a 1.1, meaning an account must be owned by a customer, then what we do is we say this column cannot be null. It must have a value in it. If we were to change our requirements, if we were to change our design to say, if this were a 0.1, meaning an account doesn't have to belong to a customer, but it can belong to 1, then what that means is this column now can be null. That's a simple design decision, design change that is done simply through whether or not this column can be null or not. Okay. What just happened? There we go. Oh, it stopped sharing. Let's go back. Come on. All right. So some other things is that if this is 1 here, then it means that there must be at least one row over here that belongs to every customer. Okay, so there must be at least one entry here. That's harder to enforce. That's a restriction that's harder to enforce. So what you'll normally see is a lot of times is this will be a 0 ... many, meaning that there's no requirement that a customer show up in the account table. Okay. All right. So that's that. So that's how we would do the one-to-many relationship. We also talked about, let's see, let me pull it up for me so I can remember. We also talked about the different one-to-one relationships. Yep. Okay. Let me just pull up a new one. Just gonna create a new diagram. All right. Mandatory participation. So on both sides, what I said with that yesterday, you have two entities, okay, where each one is required to participate and there's only one. Well, what that means is that if this table, whatever this is, table 1 and table 2, right? If this table has 3 rows in it, then that means that this table must also have 3 rows in it. If this table has 4 rows, 5 rows, 6 rows, whatever, this table must have the same exact number of rows. It doesn't make sense why we have 2 separate tables for this type of relationship. So what we do to make this resolved in our data model is we take these and we combine them into one table that has all of the attributes. So let's say this table has, let's say it has 3 attributes, and this table has 2 attributes, for example. Then what we'll do is we'll just take the 3 and the 2, and we'll combine them into one table that has all 5 attributes, assuming there's no overlap. Okay, so very simple, very, very easy to resolve there. Okay. So what about, let's undo all this and go back. Okay. Okay. So now let's say that there's optional participation on one side. Okay. So maybe, I'm blanking on a good example for this. I used the whole marriage thing, but that was really a bad example. Actually, that may not be such a bad example. Let's say that this table over here represents teachers in our system, or maybe employees, right? Oh, that's a good one. Actually, that's great. That's a great idea. We'll do employees. Employees on one side, and we'll do spouses, people that they're married to. And the reason why I'm saying this is a good example is because actually, so this may be useful for health insurance purposes. So in a lot of American companies, and I think probably maybe in Turkish companies as well, if I work for a company and I get health insurance through that company, then a lot of times they will automatically cover my wife as well if I have a spouse. If I have a wife, or if I'm a woman, if I have a husband, right? But that person may or may not be married. Just because they work for us doesn't mean that they're married, right? So this may be something that we keep track of. Right? So we have an employee and we have a potential spouse for that employee. Okay. So if we look at what the data will look like, okay. Again, we'll have information, like a name, maybe an ID, some other columns as well, right? And then the spouse will also have some information, a lot of the same information, honestly, right? Name, also an ID, maybe some other things as well, right? But our employee would have stuff that our spouse wouldn't. Our employee would have stuff like salary, all right, and some other things. Okay, so the way that we would link these tables, well, question, which one of these, okay, so here's a question for those of you who are awake enough to answer. All right, which one of these tables will have more rows in it? A or B? Table 1 or table 2? Which one will have more rows in it? What do you guys think? Okay, so Recep says B. Tirana also says B. Or says A. Okay, so we have a disagreement. One of those is going to be right, right? Okay. Well, let's think it through a little bit. Okay. Our database, we know we're keeping track of employees, right? So let's say we had 4 employees. Let's actually, here, what do we have in the class here? We have Recep. We have Tirana. We have Or. We have Bushra. Anybody else? We have, who is that? F-A, who is that? Fatih. So let's say that all the employees are us in this class, and I'm going to add me here at the end. Okay, so how many rows is this in our employees? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, so we got 6 rows here for our employees. Okay. Are any of you guys married? Hey, some of you could be. You don't know. I don't know. I'll assume that. Okay, so I'll assume that all of you are not married. So I'm going to say that there's really only one row over here, right? There's my wife. All right, my wife is over here. So this, for our company, this only has 1 row. So table A has 6 rows. Table B has 1 row. All right. Now, here's how we could do this. There's a couple of different ways that we could think this through. Okay. One way is we put a foreign key, and I'm going to do this in different colors here. There's a couple of different colors here. Let me do something that's even more different than green, because I noticed green wasn't that great. Okay, let's do orange. Okay. I could add a column over here for spouse, right? A foreign key column here for spouse. I think I put too many. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I put too many. Okay. And how would I note that this row has a spouse in this table? I would put that value here, right? Well, I want to not only say true, false, I want to say who they're married to, right? Because this connection here tells me not only does this table have a corresponding row in this table, but it's actually telling me which row it corresponds with, which row it goes to. Okay, so I could say this person's married to this person. Okay, that's one possibility for how I do that. Okay, the other, and I'll do it as a different color here so that it can be clear, is here in this table is I put a foreign key to the employee table, and I say this person's married to this. Okay. Now, question. If I do it this way, let me do it the first way. If I do it the first way I talked about here, over here, notice that, do you notice that I have that connection made, but for all of these non-married people, yeah, there's a foreign key link, right? Exactly. But all of these non-married people here, those are just null values, right? That's a bunch of wasted space, isn't it? But over here, all right, if we imagine that, let me erase some stuff here because I don't want you to think there's this row here, because this row actually doesn't exist. Right? But over here, all right, there's no wasted space. There's no null columns, right? You see that? See, if we tried to do the same thing as we did with the mandatory on both sides, where we made one long table, all of these columns here for these single people would be null. It'd be a bunch of wasted space, a bunch of useless columns there for all the places this doesn't exist. So if someone else gets married, well, let's say, okay, Tarana, let's say you get married, okay? I don't want to put you on the spot, but you asked the question, so let's say that, okay? In the first way, where if we put this column here, we have to add a row over here to who you're married to. I don't know. Let's say that you get married to Brad Pitt. Okay, I don't know if you know who Brad Pitt is, but all right. And then we find you over here and we put you in there. All right. Okay. We add a row for Brad Pitt with all his information and we link him to you through there. All right. So we add a row and we link it over there. But in the much easier way, the way that we will solve this, if we want to say that Brad Pitt is married to Tarana, right? We add his row here and we put his information there. Right? The main thing is that if we put a column here to link to the non-participant, the zero side, then we end up with all these null values, right? Which is a bunch of wasted space and not something we want to have. But here, there's no wasted space. The only way that we have a column, the only way that we have a marriage going on or a connection going on is if this column has a value in it. Okay. All right. So then the question might be, what about table 1, table 2, okay. All right. It is optional participation on both sides. Ugh. this could be a messy one. And the reason why is because unless we know what the data is going to be like, we don't know how to resolve this. There's not like a one size fits all. There's not a exact, always correct answer for this. So let's say that we have a table that represents all of the men in Turkey and all of the women in Turkey. Okay? And we'll say married to is our relationship. Okay? And the way that this is set up is a man can be married to a woman, but doesn't have to be. Many of you here in this chat, not married, right? A woman can be married to a man, does not have to be, okay? Or you're divorced, so you used to be married, but now you're not. Okay. And me, I am married, so I would have that relationship over there, okay? And so what we would do is the way this data would shape out, okay? We would have some different information, right? Okay. So let's say, let's see. I'll be in here. Who else? Okay. Real Jet. Or you're in here, right? Let's see. Fatih, you're in here. Okay. Todana, you're in here. All right. Right? This is right? Please tell me if I put you on the wrong table, because I don't want to. All right. Oh wait, I gotta include my wife. I mean, goodness, I can't mess that up. Okay. So then the question would be, we've got to figure out a way. We have to take one of these two tables, and we have to put a foreign key column into that table to point to the other one, to say that that person is married to the other person. Okay. So one option would be put a foreign key column here. Right? And say, I need to link this person to here, right? So I need to put that there. Okay. Another option might be put a foreign key column over here. And say, now we're not going to do both, okay? We're not going to do both of these. We're only going to, because that would just be a bunch of, that would be more complex on the system to maintain integrity. We're going to choose one of these two solutions. We're either going to put a foreign key column here to point to the second table, or we're going to put a foreign key column here to point to the first table. Okay? Now, in this particular example, what did we end up with? We ended up with 3 null columns here, 3 null values here, and only 2 null values here. Is that always going to be the case? We don't know. All right. Is it always going to be more null columns if we more null values if we choose option A? We just have to do an analysis of our data to discover that. But what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to, as much as possible, choose the option that reduces the amount of null values. Null values, because the column has to take up space on the server. Null values represent a waste of resources in a situation where, like for the foreign key column, they don't always represent a waste of resources, but in a situation like this, if this results in, if this results in on average 90 null columns, null values, and this solution over here results in 10 null values, we would want to choose the one with 10. We would want to reduce as much as possible the number of null values. Just as an aside, just as a piece of information here, the general solution probably in a situation like this would be to, let's see. Well, I don't know how many men are married and how many women are married, but I do know that there are more women than men in most populations. I think the human population, I think any species' population, in order to thrive, in order to survive, has to be somewhere around like at least 52%, 53% female, at least. So, yeah, maybe that could be something we could use to our advantage to understand how to do this. Okay. All right. So we talked about the one-to-one. We talked about the one-to-many. One final one that I'll go over, and then we'll call it a day here. Come on, let's see. Where are you? Okay. We'll do this whole man-woman thing again, but this time, instead of being married to, the example I gave yesterday was friends with, right? Okay. So how many women can a man be friends with? Can be. How many can be? What do you think? Many, yeah. Well, I'd agree with that. Some people might disagree. Some people might say, well, a man can't be friends with anyone. Anyway, how many women must a man be friends with? Right. And same is true on the other side as well, right? So a woman doesn't have to be friends with any men, and if she is, she can be friends with as many as she wants. Okay. So here's where this gets very interesting, because if we have our man column, right? And or here and here. Okay. Tirana, you're in here. Who else? Bushra. I'm sure I messed up your Z over there. Include my wife, because she would be upset if I didn't. Okay. So now we have a big problem, right? Because if we try to just say, well, let's add a foreign key column over here. Well, what happens when Recep becomes friends with Tirana? Okay, so right, so we put him there. Well, what happens if Recep also becomes friends with Bushra? Well, if we do it through this foreign key column thing, now we have to copy Recep's information again so that we can make him friends with Bushra, right? So all of this, and I'm going to mark it in red because this is a big bad thing, right? All this data is now duplicated. That exposes us to update anomalies. That makes a big problem. That's another thing we're trying to avoid. So I said we're trying to avoid extra null values because that's wasted space on the server. We're also trying to avoid duplicated data because that can cause big problems. All right, so we can't do it this way. And I hope you guys would understand also why just saying, okay, well, then we'll put the foreign key over here instead would result in the same problem, but then reverse. Right? So if Tirana becomes friends with Recep, great. But if Recep also becomes friends with Bushra, okay, that's still great. But now what happens when Bushra becomes friends with Ur? Oh, now we got a copied row again, right? So this is not going to work. This is not going to work at all for us. Okay, so I'm going to back out of all this. Okay. So what are we going to do instead? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to create this table in the middle. Okay, what I call the intermediate table or the middle table. Right? And what we're going to do is we're going to take the primary key from one table and put it as a copy here. So we'll call this the man primary key. We're going to take the primary key from this table put the primary key there. And I left this over here, this other column over here, there for a reason. There's a reason I left that there, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Okay, and so what happens when Recep becomes friends with Tirana? Well, we put Recep's primary key value here, we put Tirana's here, and they became friends. What happens when Recep now also becomes friends with Bushra? Well, we put Recep here, we put Bushra here, and there you go. What happens when Bushra becomes friends with Ur? There. Okay. So now each row in this table represents a connection between a row from this table and a row from this table. Okay. And one thing I'll point out again, and then we'll call it a day, is that one thing I said before is that usually if you see attributes on a relationship, it will be a many-to-many relationship. And the reason why I said that was because if this relationship has attributes, let's say, okay, was what day did they become friends? You guys all became friends today, by the way. Okay, is we can take those relationship attributes and put them into this table, this extra table we created. So if we think of other examples that would have many-to-many relationships, a student and a course. What's an attribute that might exist on something like that? Well, look. What semester was the course taken? What was the grade that was earned in that course? All right. There's other examples as well. We talked about the example from the slides, property for rent and client. And the attributes here in the middle are things like view date and comment, like when the client views a property, what day did that happen? What was their comment? Things like that. Okay. So this way, by creating this intermediate table, we end up with no duplicated data. We don't end up with the duplicated data on this side, right? By creating new rows to represent a new friendship. No duplicated data on this side for the same reason. We don't end up with null values because what if, okay, Fatih, you're the only person I didn't mention so far, so all right, let's use me. I won't use you, Fatih. But if we had this column over here, and let's say I'm not friends with anybody, I have no friends, okay, then I wouldn't have a value here, and that would be a null value, right? So not only would we be risking duplicated data, we would also have potential null values here. In the solution, though, with the intermediate table, by creating this table here. How do we represent that JL, me? How do we represent that JL doesn't have any friends? Well, I just don't show up. There is no record here. I don't show up in this table. Okay, there's no row with my primary key over there in that column. Okay. All right. So I hope this, like, kind of drawing it helped kind of clear things up a little bit and helped explain it a little bit better than just the slides. Let me stop sharing this. How do you undo? Okay. All right. And what we'll do there is, so that covers the example relationships that I gave yesterday. The one-to-one, the one-to-many, the one-to-many, the one-to-one, and the many-to-many. Okay. And I did talk about the generalization ones as well yesterday, but I won't go over those today. But I feel like what I've done so far kind of gives you a good idea of why the things are, why the way that we represent them in a data model is what it is. Okay. All right. So I hope that was helpful and informative. And like I said, we'll end there for today. And I hope that you guys all have a great Ramazan Bayram. So Shakar Bayram, and and we'll see what happens for next week as well, because there's possible discussion about extending the curfew and all that. But I'm hoping they don't, but we'll see what happens. And at any rate, we'll continue our online classes on Monday, and I will see you guys then on Monday afternoon. Other than that, have a great weekend, have a great holiday, and I'll see you next week.